Hi there, I'm Jen, this is Remembered Reads, and this is going to be the second and hopefully final Nonfiction November related book haul. I mentioned in the library haul that I did last week that I've been on a bit of a neuroscience kick in terms of what I've been interested in reading, and I'd had a number of things on hold and I was expecting to get 3 or 4 books, and I stopped by today and apparently all the ones that I was on a waiting list for have also come in. So I had 10 books to pick up. And 9 of them happen to be nonfiction, all somewhat related to neuroscience or memory function, things like that. So I thought I'd do another video. So we'll start with The Tale of the Dueling Neurosurgeons by Sam Kean. The subheading for this is The History of the Human Brain as Revealed by True Stories of Trauma, Madness, and Recovery, which I believe is about how most of the earliest brain studies were done after someone sustained brain damage, and then they'd see what changed, what type of injury caused personality change or memory loss, and so on and so forth. Because I've read a number of books that are closer to case studies or histories of individual paths of inquiry, but I think a historical overview will be interesting to read. Next up is Norman Doidge's The Brain's Way of Healing, the subheading of which is Remarkable Discoveries and Recoveries from the Frontiers of Neuroplasticity. And I believe this is looking at cases of brain damage where functions that one would imagine should have been lost end up being remapped to other parts of the brain. What heals and what doesn't heal is fascinating stuff when it comes to the brain. Next up is Ron Power's No One Cares About Crazy People. The subheading on this one is The Chaos and Heartbreak of Mental Health in America, and I believe that this is looking at the current state of services and attitudes towards mental illness and the care and rehabilitation of people with mental illnesses in the United States, which I anticipate will be depressing, but also probably interesting, so we'll see. Next up is Joshua Foer's Moonwalking with Einstein. The subheading on this one is The Art and Science of Remembering Everything. From what I've read, the author of this one started using mnemonic devices to try to perform memory feats, to try and see if he could mimic the memorization skills of someone with a photographic memory. And my understanding is that from one of the reviews that I read, I think he's temporarily successful, but as soon as he stopped trying, it kind of went away. I'm definitely curious to read more about that. So I always think memory is interesting. What do people remember? What do people not remember? So that's kind of neat. I think this is more looking at remembering things in terms of semantic memory as opposed to like episodic memory, but still, should be interesting. Next up is Smarter by Dan Hurley. The subheading on this one is The New Science of Building Brain Power, and I think this is similar to this one about improving one's brain function. I know the selling point on the inner cover of this says that it's dividing up the science from the self-help treacle, which is a little insulting towards the self-help stuff, but at the same time, look at how many people were playing Brain Age for a while. And how many people who don't like Sudoku or crossword puzzles do them because they think it's going to ward off dementia. So I am curious to read this, even though I think the description sounds a little bit snide. Next up is The Other Brain by R. Douglas Fields. The subheading on this one is From Dementia to Schizophrenia, How New Discoveries About the Brain Are Revolutionizing Medicine and Science. My understanding is that this is a sort of pop science book about recent discoveries in neuroscience. I think it was... when was this published? Not that recent, because this was published in 2009. Still, I think it'll be interesting. And considering that there was a book I was reading a couple of months ago, which I don't think I ever talked about, but it was one that was published in the 80s, so I'll be interested to compare and contrast with this one. Next up is a book that is not about neuroscience, and that is But What If We're Wrong by Chuck Klosterman. Thinking about the present as if it were the past, which is, I believe, about how attitudes towards different things change. And what we think we know is not. I really like the design of the cover, which is why I'm flipping it over. Yeah, that should be interesting. Next up is Jill Bolt Taylor's My Stroke of Insight. This is one that I think had a lot of mainstream hype when it first came out. It is about a neuroscientist who had a stroke and her experience having been the expert and becoming the patient This is a fairly short little book, so I imagine it'll be a quick read. More of a memoir than a lot of these other ones, but hey. Next up is Reading in the Brain by Stanislaus Dehaene. The subheading on this one is The Science and Evolution of a Human Invention, and I think looks at the neural underpinnings of the human ability to read. And I'm going to assume about where things like that are located in the brain, and the writing systems in all cultures always rely on the brain circuitry. And I'm hoping this will look at some of the differences between reading text or tactile versus listening. I've seen a number of brain studies about that, and I always think that's an interesting discussion. I'm looking forward to reading that. And then finally, Proust and the Squid by Marianne Wolfe, which is subheading to The Story and Science of the Reading Brain. I think this is going to cover similar topics to this, so I'm going to try to read these back to back and see how they compare. So those are the 9 books that I just went and picked up this morning. So we'll see if I get through them and or the other ones that I mentioned. Of the books that I talked about last week, I've actually already returned the SPQR one because that ended up being overdue and I did not have a chance to read it over the weekend. But I might take that out another time. I may have gotten a little carried away. Have you ever gotten carried away at the library? I know last time I was talking about a book that I picked up accidentally, but I think I sometimes get too enthusiastic about putting things on hold. Anyway, that's it for now. Ciao.